Everything
She
seems to be
raised
in
him
order.
like her own,
Good. The pie
gave him
should be
everything,
ready.
and he
Perfect
repaid her
timing.
by kicking her to the curb. Evelyn believed that love was enough,
Can't just
but her
leave.
adopted son,
Please, don't do
Ryan,
this.
had other ideas. He saw her house not as a home, but as a stepping stone. As she stood on that porch, completely unaware of what was happening, her entire world was collapsing around her. The key wouldn't turn. Evelyn Carter stood on the porch she'd swept every morning for 22 years, groceries still warm in her arms, staring at a lock that no longer recognized her touch. When the door finally opened, it wasn't her son who greeted her. It was his girlfriend, Natalie, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You weren't supposed to be back until later," Natalie said, stepping outside and pulling the door shut behind her. "Ryan was going to talk to you about that." "Talk to me about what?" "You don't live here anymore." But what Ryan and his girlfriend didn't know was that while they believed they were taking everything, they had just left Evelyn with the one thing they didn't realize she had, a secret that was worth more than the entire house, and a weapon they never saw coming. The question wasn't if she would get her home back, but what she would do with it once she did. Long before the paperwork, before the lies, before her front porch became foreign territory, Evelyn Carter had been more than just a woman in a house. She had been a mother, and not just to anybody, but to a child nobody else wanted. Evelyn was a woman in her late 60s now, her hair silver white and pulled back in the same neat bun she'd worn for decades. Her hands, though weathered by time and work, still moved with the precision of someone who had spent 30 years as a floor nurse at St. Joseph's Hospital in Jackson, Mississippi. She was kind and soft-spoken, the type of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and never raised her voice, even when the situation called for it. But beneath that gentle exterior was a resilience forged in the fires of loss and hardship. She was strong in ways that couldn't be measured, the kind of strength that comes from surviving 2 miscarriages, a failed round of IVF, and the quiet grief of thinking she'd never be a mother. Her vulnerability was simple, her undying, quiet love for Ryan. It was the kind of love that forgave before apologies were offered, that saw potential where others saw problems, that never stopped believing in redemption. Back in 1996, when Evelyn was working the night shift at the hospital, she met a broken little boy who would change her life forever. Ryan had come in with a fractured wrist, barely 2 years old, pale and underfed, wearing a t-shirt 3 sizes too big with mustard stains on the collar. His foster mother didn't even stay, just dropped him off with child services and disappeared into the night. Evelyn didn't go looking to adopt, but sometimes destiny doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it just places a baby in your arms and dares you to put him down. Ryan was silent for the first few days, clinging to her scrubs like a vine reaching for sunlight. He wouldn't speak to anyone else, wouldn't eat unless she fed him. Something about her made him feel safe, and that was enough for Evelyn. 2 months later, she filed the first set of adoption papers. 6 months after that, he had her last name. Her friends thought she was crazy. A single black woman in her late 30s, adopting a white toddler with behavioral issues? "Girl, you trying to save the whole system?" "No," she'd reply with that quiet smile of hers. "Just this one. Building a life, brick by brick." Evelyn gave Ryan everything she'd never had growing up. A bedroom painted blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, a race car bed that made vrooming sounds when he jumped on it, packed lunches with his name written in careful marker script. She signed him up for swimming lessons at the YMCA, piano lessons with Mrs. Henderson down the street, and every Saturday they'd make the trip to the Jackson Zoo, where Ryan would press his face against the glass of the monkey exhibit and giggle until his cheeks turned red. When he developed asthma at age 4, she researched pediatricians for weeks until she found the best one in the state. When he struggled with reading in 2nd grade, she hired a tutor and spent her own evenings sitting beside him at the kitchen table, sounding out words until her voice was hoarse. She even taught him how to braid hair using his G.I. Joe action figures, telling him, "One day you might have a daughter, and she's going to need to know her daddy cares enough to learn." She made him write thank you notes after every Christmas and birthday, taught him to say, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, sir," and never once missed a parent-teacher conference, even if it meant switching shifts at the hospital. But not everything was perfect. As Ryan grew older, the question started, "Why do I look different from you, Mama?" Why do people stare at us in the store? Why does everybody always ask if I'm adopted? Evelyn always answered with the same gentle words. Because you are adopted, baby. But that doesn't mean you're not mine. Love doesn't come from blood, it comes from choice. And I chose you every single day. He never fully accepted that answer. If you are enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means a lot to us. We are just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you. And back to the video. In middle school, Ryan grew quieter, more withdrawn. He'd come home from school with his shoulders hunched, his backpack dragging behind him like an anchor. The other kids had started asking more pointed questions, making comments about his real family, wondering why his mom was black and he was white. By high school, the distance had widened into a chasm. Ryan would barely speak at dinner, spending most of his time in his room with the door closed, music bleeding through the walls. When he left for college on a partial scholarship that Evelyn had helped him apply for, their conversations became even shorter. Quick phone calls on Sundays, hurried visits during breaks where he seemed more interested in his phone than in the woman who had raised him. But Evelyn never complained. She kept his room exactly the way he'd left it, dusted the trophies on his dresser, and made sure his favorite cookies were always in the pantry when he visited. She told herself that love, even quiet love, would be enough to bridge the gap between them. When Leonard, her husband of 29 years, passed away 3 years ago from what should have been a treatable blood clot, Evelyn thought she had experienced the deepest pain possible. Leonard had been her anchor, the steady presence who balanced her nurturing nature with practical wisdom. They had met at Mount Olive Baptist Church, fallen in love over fried catfish and Bible study discussions, and built a life that rested on faith, forgiveness, and quiet joy. After Leonard's funeral, something unexpected happened. Ryan started coming around more. The return of the prodigal son. At first, Evelyn was overjoyed. Ryan would show up on weekends with his girlfriend Natalie, a sharp-eyed woman with perfectly straightened hair and designer handbags that cost more than Evelyn's monthly grocery budget. Ryan seemed helpful, cleaning gutters, mowing the lawn, reminding her to take her blood pressure medication, fixing the squeaky hinge on the back door that Leonard had always meant to get to. He'd bring Natalie along, and they'd sit on the front porch while Evelyn made cornbread from scratch and watched Jeopardy, the ceiling fan creaking overhead in a rhythm that felt like home. During those visits, Evelyn allowed herself to believe that grief had finally taught her son what she'd been trying to show him all along. That family wasn't about blood, but about showing up. She was wrong. What Evelyn didn't realize was that Ryan hadn't come home to heal or to reconnect. He had come to take inventory. While she saw a son returning to his mother's arms, he saw real estate. While she cooked his favorite meals, he was calculating square footage. While she talked about memories, he was thinking about market value. Ryan was ambitious in the worst possible way, the kind of ambitious that saw opportunity in other people's vulnerabilities. He was greedy, but not just for money. He was hungry for a life that felt bigger than the one he'd grown up in, and he saw Evelyn's modest home not as the foundation of love it had been, but as equity to be unlocked. He had become callous in a way that would have broken Leonard's heart, exploiting the very trust that Evelyn had spent decades building. He was arrogant in his certainty that his elderly mother would never see through his carefully constructed facade of concern. Natalie was his perfect accomplice. She worked at a real estate law firm and spoke in the kind of corporate language that made deception sound like protection. She was focused solely on their shared financial goals, viewing Evelyn not as Ryan's mother, but as an obstacle to their plans for a bigger apartment in Dallas, a nicer car, a life funded by the sale of someone else's memories. The house on Maple Street. The house itself sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees and front porches where neighbors still waved to each other. It wasn't grand, just a modest two-story with white siding and green shutters, a vegetable garden in the back where Evelyn grew tomatoes and okra, and a front porch swing where she and Leonard used to sit on summer evenings, watching the lightning bugs dance in the gathering dusk. But this house was Evelyn's life's work. Every room held memories. The kitchen where she'd taught Ryan to make pancakes on Saturday mornings, the living room where they'd built blanket forts during thunderstorms, The small bedroom upstairs that had been transformed from a nursery they'd never needed into a space where a scared little boy learned that home meant safety. The power imbalance was stark and heartbreaking. Here was a vulnerable, trusting woman in her late 60s, a woman whose greatest weakness was her inability to see evil in the people she loved. And there was her son, younger, financially savvy, legally educated through Natalie, and willing to exploit every ounce of trust his mother had ever placed in him. Evelyn stood to lose everything, not just the physical house, but her sense of security, her independence, and perhaps most devastating of all, the illusion of family love that had sustained her through decades of quiet sacrifice. But there were subtle signs that Evelyn was more than she appeared. In quiet moments, we caught glimpses of her taking notes in a small spiral notebook, the same one she'd carried as a nurse, a habit of documenting everything, just in case. When she signed those papers that afternoon, squinting at the small print, her fingers had hesitated over each signature, and she'd asked questions that Ryan had smoothly deflected. There was also the matter of Leonard's death. Not just the grief of losing him, but the anger she'd felt at the hospital's misdiagnosis, the way they tried to brush off what should have been a preventable tragedy. That anger had been quiet, but it had also been productive. The stage was set for a confrontation between love and greed, between trust and manipulation, between a woman who had given everything and a son who had decided that everything wasn't enough. But Ryan had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated the quiet strength of the woman who had raised him.
Everything
The
seems
first
to be in
time
order.
Ryan brought the
Good.
papers
The
to
pie
the
should
kitchen
be ready.
table. It was
Perfect
a Sunday
timing.
in late September. The air conditioning hummed softly, and the house smelled like the sweet potato pie cooling on the counter. Evelyn was folding dish towels, her arthritic fingers moving slowly but steadily, when Ryan and Natalie walked in without knocking. "Hey, Mama," Ryan said, giving her a perfunctory hug that felt more like a business handshake. "We brought some paperwork by. Nothing major, just some legal housekeeping stuff." Natalie hung back by the doorway, her manicured fingers tapping against her phone screen. "It's really standard stuff, Miss Carter. Just protecting your assets." Evelyn looked up from the towels, her brow furrowing slightly. "What kind of papers?" Ryan spread the documents across the table like a magician revealing his cards. Trust agreements, real estate transfers, power of attorney forms, official-looking documents with dense legal language that seemed to swim before Evelyn's eyes. "It's just tax stuff mostly," Ryan said with practiced casualness. "And some estate planning. If something happens to you, God forbid, this just makes sure everything stays in the family without a lot of legal hassle." Evelyn stared at the papers, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. She'd never needed them for much besides the newspaper crossword, and the small print made her eyes water. "I should probably have someone look at these," she said slowly. "Mama, I've already had them reviewed," Ryan said, his voice taking on that patient tone adults use with children. "Natalie's firm handles this kind of thing every day. It's all standard language." But it wasn't the legal jargon that made Evelyn hesitate. It was something in Ryan's eyes. A flicker of impatience, maybe, or the way he kept checking his watch as if her questions were keeping him from something more important. Still, this was her baby, the little boy who used to cry when she left his bedroom at night, who'd needed her to check under the bed for monsters until he was almost 10. So she signed, page after page, her careful cursive spelling out Evelyn Louise Carter, while the pie timer ticked in the background. "You're making history, Mama," Ryan joked as she finished the last signature. She managed a small laugh, but something cold had settled in her stomach. 3 years earlier, Leonard had complained of shortness of breath and chest pain. Evelyn, with her nursing background, had insisted they go to the emergency room immediately. But the attending physician, a young resident who seemed more interested in his clipboard than his patient, had dismissed Leonard's symptoms as anxiety. "Probably just stress," he'd said with a condescending smile. "Maybe cut back on the fried foods, sir." Leonard had died 6 hours later from a massive pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that any experienced nurse would have caught, that any competent doctor should have suspected. The same hospital where Evelyn had worked for 3 decades, where she'd saved countless lives through careful observation and intuition, had killed her husband through negligence and arrogance. The grief was immediate and crushing. But beneath the sorrow was something else, a slow-burning anger at the injustice of it all. Leonard had been a good man, a faithful husband, a steady presence who deserved better than a dismissive resident and a preventable death. That anger would prove useful later. The escalation. Over the following months, Ryan's visits became more frequent, but somehow less personal. He'd arrive with investor friends, sharp-suited men, who walked through Evelyn's house like they were touring a property, pointing at crown molding and commenting on square footage. They'd talk over her as if she weren't there, discussing market potential and optimal timing. "The house has good bones," one of them said, running his hand along the banister that Leonard had refinished by hand. "Prime location, too. Close to the medical district." Ryan would nod along, playing the role of dutiful son while simultaneously treating Evelyn like a houseguest in her own home. He started calling her Evelyn instead of Mama when Natalie was around, and his questions shifted from "How are you feeling?" to "Have you thought about downsizing?" The most painful moment came on a Wednesday afternoon when Evelyn overheard Natalie on the phone in the living room. She was talking to someone about apartments in Dallas, her voice bright with excitement. "Once we close on this place, we can finally get that 2-bedroom in the Arts District," she'd said. "Ryan thinks we can get at least $400,000 for it, maybe more if we time it right." Evelyn had been watering her begonias on the front porch when she heard it, and her hand had frozen on the watering can. Close on this place. Her place. Her home. That night, she quietly packed a small overnight bag and tucked it in the back of her closet, just in case. What Ryan and Natalie didn't know, what no one knew, was that Leonard's death had not been quietly accepted by his widow. Evelyn might have been soft-spoken, but 30 years as a nurse had taught her to recognize patterns, to document everything, and to fight for what was right. After Leonard's funeral, after the casseroles had been eaten and the sympathy cards had been filed away, she had begun making phone calls. First to the hospital's patient advocacy office, where a tired-sounding woman had assured her that complications sometimes arise in medical care. Then to the state medical board, where Leonard's case had been assigned a number and filed away with hundreds of others. Finally, to a medical malpractice attorney who had listened to her story with the weary attention of someone who'd heard it all before. But Evelyn was persistent. She kept calling, kept pushing, kept demanding answers. She provided documentation of Leonard's symptoms, witness statements from neighbors who'd heard him complaining of chest pain for days, and her own professional assessment of what any competent medical team should have done. 2 years and countless legal battles later, the hospital had quietly settled. $9.5 million, more money than Evelyn had ever imagined having, compensation for a life that could never truly be compensated. She hadn't told anyone, not her church friends, not her neighbors, and especially not Ryan. The money sat untouched in a separate trust fund under her maiden name, divided among several accounts to avoid attention. It wasn't paranoia that had kept her quiet, it was wisdom. Evelyn had seen what money could do to families, how it could turn love into transaction and children into opportunists. She had wanted to protect Ryan from that temptation, to keep their relationship pure. She had succeeded too well. The internal resistance. Evelyn's resistance to what was happening wasn't dramatic or confrontational. She didn't yell or make accusations or demand explanations. Instead, her response was quiet and methodical, the response of someone who had learned to trust her instincts even when her heart wanted to deny them. She began paying closer attention to conversations, writing down dates and quotes in her small notebook. When Ryan talked about protecting her assets, she made note of his exact words. When Natalie mentioned apartment hunting, she documented that too. When investor friends walked through her house, she remembered their names and their comments. She also started making subtle preparations. Important documents were quietly moved to a safety deposit box. Photos of Leonard were carefully packed away. Her most precious possessions, the jewelry Leonard had given her, the Bible her mother had left her, the small treasures that money couldn't replace, were gathered together where she could reach them quickly if needed. Most importantly, she reached out to old connections. There was C.J. Bell, Leonard's best friend from childhood, who had become a successful attorney before retiring to a small town outside Jackson. And there was her cousin Marie in Lafayette, who had always been good in a crisis. She didn't tell them everything, not yet, but she re-established contact, just in case. On a gray Tuesday morning in November, Evelyn drove to the First National Bank downtown, where she'd kept the settlement money hidden for over 2 years. She wasn't there to withdraw anything, just to confirm that her secret was still safe. The bank manager, Mrs. Henderson, greeted her warmly. They'd gone to church together for years, though Mrs. Henderson had no idea about the size of Evelyn's private accounts. "How are you doing, sweetheart?" Mrs. Henderson asked. "I know this has been a difficult time since Leonard passed." Evelyn nodded, then quietly asked to review her account statements. As she sat in the small office, looking at numbers that still didn't feel real, she reflected on the irony of her situation. Here she was, technically a multimillionaire, worrying about losing her home to a son who thought she was destitute. The money hadn't changed her daily life at all. She still clipped coupons, still shopped sales, still worried about her electricity bill. Not because she had to, but because those habits were part of who she was. The settlement was Leonard's justice, not her windfall, and she had treated it as such, something sacred, something to be preserved. But sitting in that bank office, she began to realize that her careful preservation of Ryan's innocence had become an enablement of his greed. By protecting him from the knowledge of her resources, she had allowed him to see her as vulnerable prey instead of the strong woman she had always been. 2 weeks after the bank visit, Evelyn called C.J. Bell from a pay phone at a gas station 20 minutes from her house. She felt paranoid making the call from home, though she couldn't have explained why. C.J.'s voice was exactly as she remembered, gravelly from years of cigarettes he'd quit too late, but warm with genuine affection. "Evelyn Carter, as I live and breathe," he said when she identified herself. "I was just thinking about you and Leonard the other day. How you holding up, darling?" "I need to see you, C.J.," she said simply. "Can you meet me somewhere quiet?" They met the next afternoon at a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the coffee came in thick ceramic mugs and the waitress called everyone honey. C.J. looked older than she remembered. His dark skin had gone ashy around the edges, and he moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints had begun to betray him. But his eyes were still sharp, still the eyes of a man who had spent 40 years reading people's lies and finding the truth buried underneath. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world," he said after they'd ordered coffee and pie. So Evelyn told him everything. About the papers Ryan had brought, about the investor friends and the apartment hunting, about the way her son had begun treating her like a tenant in her own home. She showed him her notebook with its careful documentation, its dates and quotes, and growing evidence of a pattern. C.J. listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making soft sounds of understanding. When she finished, he sat back in the vinyl booth and studied her face. "You know what he's doing, don't you?" he said finally. "I think so, but I needed to hear someone else say it." "He's stealing your house, Evelyn. Slowly and carefully, but stealing it all the same." C.J.'s voice was gentle but firm. "Question is, what are you going to do about it?" That's when Evelyn told him about the settlement money. C.J.'s coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. $9.5 million, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never touched it. Didn't want Ryan to know. Didn't want money to change how he saw me." C.J. set down his cup with a soft clink. "Baby girl, you've been sitting on enough money to buy your whole neighborhood, and you're letting this boy manipulate you out of your home. I thought if he never knew about it, our love would stay pure. I thought." She trailed off, then looked up at C.J. with eyes that held more pain than anger. "I thought I was protecting him from becoming the kind of person who would do what he's doing right now." C.J. reached across the table and covered her weathered hand with his. "You can't protect people from their own choices, Evelyn. You can only protect yourself from the consequences." The breaking point. The final straw came on a Wednesday evening in December. Evelyn was in her bedroom, folding laundry and watching the evening news, when she heard voices in the living room below. Ryan and Natalie had let themselves in with the key she'd given them years ago, and they were talking to someone else, a man with a smooth, professional voice who was clearly walking through the house. "The kitchen could use updating," the man was saying, "but the bones are solid. Good investment potential. We're thinking spring market, Ryan replied. Get it listed as soon as the paperwork clears. Evelyn crept to the top of the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. Through the banister, she could see Ryan leading a real estate agent through her home, pointing out features like a tour guide, discussing staging and curb appeal and comparable sales in the neighborhood. What about the current resident? The agent asked. That's all handled, Natalie said dismissively. She'll be relocating to assisted living. It's really better for everyone. Assisted living. They were planning to put her in assisted living and sell her house without even discussing it with her. The casual cruelty of it. The assumption that she was too old and too naive to have any say in her own life hit her like a physical blow. Evelyn quietly returned to her bedroom and finished folding the laundry. Then she pulled her small suitcase from the closet and began to pack. Not much, just enough for a few days. She had somewhere to go now, and something to do, and a phone call to make. But first, she needed to be sure about one thing. She needed to know that the man she had raised, the little boy she had loved unconditionally, was truly gone. She needed to look him in the eye and see if there was any trace left of the child who had once clung to her scrubs in a hospital hallway. She needed to give him one last chance to remember who he used to be before she reminded him of who she had always been. Evelyn didn't call ahead. She knew if she did, Ryan would either hang up on her or have Natalie screen the call with some excuse about being busy. Instead, she drove to the house, her house, still legally hers for a few more days, on a cold Thursday afternoon when the winter light was thin and unforgiving. The yard looked different somehow. Too neat, like a property prepared for showing rather than a home where people lived. Her beloved begonias had been pulled up and replaced with generic shrubs from a garden center. The personal touches that had made the place distinctly theirs had been quietly erased. She knocked once on the front door, then used her key when no one answered immediately. The sound of her footsteps on the hardwood floors she'd walked for over 2 decades felt strange now, like she was trespassing in her own life. "Ryan," she called out. He emerged from the kitchen wearing workout clothes and holding a protein shake, his face shifting through several expressions when he saw her: surprise, annoyance, and finally a kind of weary resignation. "Evelyn," he said, and the use of her first name instead of Mama felt like another small death. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you." Behind him, Natalie appeared in the doorway, her phone pressed to her ear in the middle of what sounded like a business call. She gave Evelyn a tight smile and a little wave, as if she were greeting a neighbor who dropped by uninvited. "Look, if this is about the house situation," Ryan began, but Evelyn held up her hand. "Let me say what I came to say." Ryan glanced at Natalie, who had ended her call and was now listening with obvious interest. He sighed and gestured toward the living room, the same room where Evelyn had rocked him to sleep as a baby, where they'd watched Saturday morning cartoons, where she'd helped him with homework at the coffee table Leonard had built by hand. "I raised you when nobody else would," Evelyn began, her voice steady but soft. "Not because I had to, and not because I wanted gratitude. I did it because I saw a child who needed love, and I had love to give." Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes focused on something over her shoulder rather than on her face. "I gave you everything I had," she continued. "Not just money or a house or clothes or food. I gave you my time, my energy, my hopes, my fears. I sat up with you when you were sick. I cheered at your baseball games. I helped you with your homework and taught you to drive and held you when you cried about girls who broke your heart." "Mama. Don't call me Mama if you don't mean it." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, but she didn't regret them. "I never made you feel like a guest in your own life. I never made you earn my love or prove you deserved to be part of this family. And you repaid me with lies and manipulation and changed locks." Ryan's face was flushed now, whether from embarrassment or anger, she couldn't tell. Natalie had moved closer, as if sensing drama that might need to be managed. "You signed the papers," Ryan said defensively. "I didn't force you to do anything. You tricked me. You made me believe I was protecting my home when I was actually giving it away. You brought in your investor friends and your real estate agent and made plans to put me in assisted living without even asking if that's what I wanted. The silence in the room was heavy and uncomfortable. Through the window, Evelyn could see the neighbor's cat picking its way across the front yard, and for a moment she was overwhelmed by the normalcy of it. How regular life continued even when your world was falling apart. "But here's what you need to know, Ryan," Evelyn said, straightening her shoulders and looking directly into his eyes. "I'm not the helpless old woman you think I am. I'm not broke, and I never was." Ryan's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his features. "When your stepfather died," she paused, noting how he flinched at her use of Leonard's title. "It wasn't just from old age or natural causes. It was malpractice, medical negligence from the same hospital where I'd worked for 30 years. And I didn't just accept that." Natalie was staring now, her phone forgotten in her hand. "I fought them, Ryan. I fought them for 2 years. I hired lawyers and gathered evidence and made them face what they'd done. And when it was over, they paid. They paid $9.5 million. The protein shake slipped from Ryan's hand and hit the floor with a soft thud, vanilla liquid spreading across the hardwood in a pale puddle. "That money has been sitting in accounts you don't even know exist for over 2 years. I never touched it because I didn't want it to change you. I didn't want you to see me differently or treat me differently or love me differently because of money." Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. All the color had drained from his face. "But now I see that it wouldn't have mattered," Evelyn continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You were already planning to take everything from the woman who raised you. Money didn't make you greedy, Ryan. It just would have made you greedier." I didn't know," he stammered. "Of course you didn't know. You weren't supposed to know. Because love isn't supposed to be about what people can do for you financially. Family isn't supposed to be about inheritance and profit margins and unlocking equity." She stepped closer to him, and for a moment he looked like the scared little boy she remembered from that night in the hospital. "I could buy this house 10 times over," she said quietly. "I could buy this whole neighborhood. But I don't need to, because I've already spoken to a lawyer, and he's already filed papers to have this fraudulent transfer investigated. You want to play legal games? Let's play legal games." What happened next was swift and devastating in its completeness. Ryan's face cycled through emotions like a broken slot machine, shock giving way to panic, panic giving way to something that might have been shame if it hadn't been so mixed with self-pity. He started to speak several times, reaching toward her with one hand as if he could somehow undo what had been done with a gesture. "Mama, we can fix this. We can work something out." But Evelyn was already walking toward the door. "There's nothing to work out," she said without turning around. "You made your choice. You chose money over love, property over family, lies over truth. Now live with what you chose." The legal proceedings that followed were anticlimactic in their efficiency. CJ had connected her with a former colleague who specialized in elder fraud, and the evidence was overwhelming. The papers Ryan had presented as routine estate planning were revealed to be a comprehensive transfer of property obtained through misrepresentation and emotional manipulation. The judge who reviewed the case was a woman in her 50s who had seen enough family betrayals to recognize the pattern immediately. Her ruling was swift and unambiguous. The transfer was fraudulent, obtained through deception, and legally void. Ryan never showed up to any of the hearings. According to neighbors, he and Natalie had packed up their things and left for Dallas 3 days after Evelyn's confrontation. They'd taken some furniture that hadn't belonged to them and left behind a house full of memories that no longer felt like home. But Evelyn's vindication wasn't about getting her house back. It was about what she chose to do with her newfound freedom. Standing in the empty rooms where she'd raised her son, looking at the walls that had witnessed so much love and hope and ultimately betrayal, she realized something profound. This house had become a mausoleum of broken dreams. Every corner held reminders of the family she'd thought she was building and the son she'd thought she was raising. She could have moved back in, could have reclaimed her bedroom and her kitchen and her front porch swing. But she was a different woman now, not broken, but transformed. The old Evelyn had been defined by her willingness to give endlessly, to love unconditionally, to sacrifice without question. The new Evelyn understood that love without boundaries wasn't love at all. It was enabling. So she made a different choice. Within a month of regaining legal ownership of the house, Evelyn put it on the market. Not because she needed the money, but because she needed the freedom. The house sold quickly to a young couple with twin toddlers who fell in love with the built-in bookshelves and the big backyard perfect for swing sets. With the settlement money she'd finally decided to touch, combined with the proceeds from the house sale, Evelyn bought 3 modest homes in Pascagoula, Mississippi, a small coastal town where Leonard had always dreamed of retiring. The houses weren't fancy, just solid 2-bedroom homes with front porches and small yards, the kind of places where people could start over. She turned them into safe housing for women over 60 who had been evicted, displaced, or abandoned by their families. Women like herself who had discovered too late that the people they trusted most were the ones willing to hurt them deepest. She called the program Len's Place in honor of her late husband, knowing he would have approved of the mission. Leonard had always believed that home wasn't a building. It was a feeling of safety, of being valued, of belonging somewhere without condition. The first resident was Alma Washington, a 74-year-old former teacher who'd been kicked out by her grandson when she could no longer provide full-time childcare for his children. Alma arrived with 2 suitcases and a lifetime of disappointment etched in the lines around her eyes. The second was Darlene Murphy, whose own daughter had sold her house while she was in rehabilitation after hip surgery, pocketing the money and leaving her mother homeless at 71. The third was Rosa Gonzalez, who spoke limited English, but whose story needed no translation. She'd been caring for her son's family for 15 years until a new daughter-in-law decided she was too much trouble to keep around. Every Sunday, Evelyn cooked dinner for all the women in the program, not out of obligation, but out of joy. They gathered in the main house, which Evelyn had claimed as her own, and shared meals around a table that had room for everyone. Sometimes they watched game shows afterward, shouting answers at the television and laughing at each other's competitive streaks. Sometimes they just sat on the porch, sharing stories about the people who had hurt them and the strength they'd found in survival. These women understood each other in ways that didn't require explanation. They recognized the particular pain of being discarded by children they'd raised, of having their love treated as a commodity, of discovering that family loyalty only flowed in one direction. But they also recognized resilience when they saw it, and they saw it in each other every day. Evelyn never had to explain her story to any of them. They could read it in the careful way she budgeted the program's expenses despite having millions at her disposal, and how she still clipped coupons and shopped sales, not from necessity, but from habit. They saw it in the way she flinched slightly whenever someone's adult child called on the phone, and how she always asked twice if they really wanted to take the call or if they needed a moment to prepare. Most of all, they saw it in her quiet determination to create something good from something terrible, to transform her own betrayal into a blueprint for healing. CJ visited regularly, always bringing his terrible jokes and his ability to fix whatever had broken that week. He'd appointed himself the unofficial legal counsel for Len's Place, handling lease agreements and insurance issues, and the occasional family member who showed up demanding to know why their elderly relative was living in charity housing when they should be helping family. "You've turned your heartbreak into a healing place," he told Evelyn one afternoon as they watched Alma teach Rosa how to crochet while Darlene narrated a soap opera from the kitchen. Leonard would be proud. Evelyn smiled, but it was a different kind of smile than she'd worn in her old life. This smile had edges to it, boundaries. It was the smile of a woman who had learned that kindness didn't require self-sacrifice, that love didn't mean accepting mistreatment, that helping others could be an act of strength rather than weakness. 1 year to the day after Ryan had changed the locks on her door, Evelyn sat on the back porch of Len's Place, watching the sun set over the Mississippi Sound. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of the sherbet Leonard used to buy for special occasions, and the salt air carried the sound of Alma's laughter from somewhere inside the house. In her lap was a cup of tea that had gone cold while she read, and beside her on the weathered porch table was a letter that had arrived that morning. No return address, just her name written in handwriting she recognized despite not having seen it in almost a year. The letter was short. Evelyn, I know I have no right to write to you after what I did. I know sorry isn't enough, and I know I can't take back the hurt I caused. But I needed to tell you that I see it now. What you gave me, what you sacrificed, what I threw away. I lost Natalie. I lost the apartment, lost the job I thought I was so smart to get. I lost everything I thought mattered. And then I realized I'd already lost the only thing that actually did matter, you. I don't know why I did what I did. Maybe I thought I was owed something for being adopted, like the world had shortchanged me, and I needed to collect what was mine. Maybe I just never understood that what you gave me, love without conditions, was worth more than any house or any money. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it, and I know you well enough to know you can't just choose to forgive someone because they finally figured out they were wrong. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I had, and I understand what I lost. I hope you're okay. I hope you're happy. I hope you found something better than the son who disappointed you. Ryan. Evelyn read the letter twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her Bible. Not the place of honor, where she kept Leonard's last note to her, but in the back with the church bulletins and prayer requests, the things that mattered but didn't define her. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying already, months ago in a motel room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams. What she felt now was something closer to peace. Not the peace of reconciliation, but the peace of completion. The story had ended, not with the dramatic reunion she might once have hoped for, but with the quiet acknowledgement of truth. From inside the house came the sound of Darlene calling everyone to dinner, her voice mixing with Rosa's accented English and Alma's gentle corrections to whatever cooking disaster was unfolding in the kitchen. These were the sounds of her real family now, not perfect, not built on shared blood or legal documents, but authentic in a way that couldn't be faked or manipulated or stolen. Evelyn stood slowly, her knees protesting the movement, but her spirit lighter than it had been in years. She looked out over the small yard where Rosa had planted a vegetable garden, where Alma had hung bird feeders that attracted cardinals and blue jays, where Darlene had set up a small table for the crossword puzzles she worked on every morning. This was home now, not a building or a piece of property, but a feeling. The feeling of being valued for who you were rather than what you could provide, of being safe without having to earn that safety every day, of belonging somewhere because you chose to be there and others chose to have you. As she walked toward the house, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had started as a woman who believed that love meant giving everything and asking for nothing in return. She had learned, painfully and slowly, that real love required boundaries, that true family was built on mutual respect rather than one-sided sacrifice, that the people who truly deserved your love were the ones who would never ask you to prove it by destroying yourself. She had lost a son but found a purpose. She had lost a house but built a home. She had lost her illusions but found her strength. Most importantly, she had learned that being underestimated by others said nothing about her worth and everything about their limitations. Ryan had seen an elderly woman with a modest house and a trusting heart, someone to be manipulated and discarded. He had missed the nurse who had fought for her patients' lives, the widow who had taken on a hospital system and won, the mother who had loved unconditionally but was strong enough to love with boundaries when unconditional love became enabling. The door of Len's place opened, and warm light spilled out onto the porch along with the aroma of whatever Darlene had managed to cook without burning. Alma appeared in the doorway, her silver hair pinned back with the colorful clips Rosa had given her for Christmas. "You coming in, honey?" Alma asked. "Dinner's ready, and we saved you the good chair." Evelyn smiled, that new smile that had learned to protect itself while still remaining open to joy. "I'm coming," she said, as she crossed the threshold into the warmth and laughter and imperfect love of the family she had chosen and who had chosen her back. Evelyn felt something she hadn't experienced since Leonard's death, the deep satisfaction of being exactly where she belonged. The final reflection. The story of Evelyn Carter wasn't really about money or houses or legal documents. It was about the difference between love that demands proof and love that simply exists, between family built on obligation and family built on choice, between strength that announces itself loudly and strength that works quietly in the background until the moment it's needed. It was about the truth that real mothers don't fold under pressure. They adapt, they learn. They protect what matters while refusing to enable what doesn't. It was about the power that comes not from controlling others, but from refusing to let others control you. Most of all, it was about the quiet revolution of a woman who had spent her life being underestimated and who had finally decided to stop underestimating herself. Evelyn didn't write Ryan back. She didn't need to. Forgiveness, she had learned, wasn't about letting someone off the hook for their actions. It was about freeing yourself from the hook of their expectations. She had forgiven him not because he deserved it, but because she deserved the peace that came with letting go. The story ended not with a reunion or a dramatic confrontation or a moment of perfect justice, but with something better. The quiet triumph of a woman who had built a new life from the ashes of betrayal, who had turned her deepest hurt into her greatest service, who had learned that real power doesn't scream or demand recognition. Real power builds quietly, loves wisely, and creates something beautiful from something broken. And sometimes, that's the most powerful story of all. If this story hit you somewhere deep, if it reminded you of someone you've lost, loved, or let go, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Remember, real love can't be stolen, real mothers don't fold, and real power doesn't scream. It builds again, quietly, from the ground up,